Without a doubt, after the huge disappointments of Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett, this is the series that's gonna save Star Wars. Hey y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. Andor premiered on Disney Plus today, with 3 episodes of about 40 minutes each now available to binge. For the non-spoiler part of my review, I can tell you this show is absolutely mind-blowing, and I'm giving this premiere a solid 9 out of 10. I will say, so far, this series is a slow burn show. If you're looking for non-stop action and constant one-liners, this isn't the series for you. The first 2 episodes are slow, but not overly slow. They're tantalizing in the bits of information they give you, and the scenes that do have action in them build up beautifully. The 3rd episode of the premiere, however, takes off in a big way and had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. In my opinion, this show seems to have had a way bigger budget than series like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett, because the production quality and variation in scenery, costume design, etc. is way better and more grand than either of those other series. Diego Luna also puts on an incredibly satisfying performance. He's funny and charismatic when he needs to be, but he's also the grittiest, sketchiest Star Wars hero we've seen to date. Disney is definitely not afraid to show you that this guy is often on the wrong side of morality. It's a show that's a lot grittier and way more violent than any other Star Wars media. While it's not entirely devoid of lighthearted moments, this is definitely a more serious adult side of Star Wars, which is an absolute treat for adult viewers looking to watch something Star Wars with a little more gravitas. That's all I can really say without giving too much away. I give Andor's 3-episode premiere a rating of 9 out of 10. Now, let's get into it. From this point forward, there will be spoilers for the 3-episode premiere of Andor. Let's kick it off with episode 1. We open on a rain-soaked Cassian Andor walking in the corporate zone of Morlana 1. And we're also given a reminder that this show takes place 5 years before the events of Rogue One. We're treated to some pretty cool views of this seedy city, and Cassian is soon walking up to a door and entering this seedy yet futuristic looking lounge that has a way different vibe than any of the musical, lighthearted cantinas we've seen in Star Wars before. He's approached by a female employee, and her quick service to Cassian causes the 2 guards across the bar to have a bit of a fuss. Cassian tells the woman that he's looking for a girl from Kenari, and when he's probed enough, he mentions that he's searching for his sister. After a brief yet extremely unpleasant exchange with the guards across the bar, he's told by the woman that the girl from Kenari was there, but she's been gone for months now. And clearly disappointed, Cassian Andor walks back out into the rain. He's followed by the guards from the lounge, and they ask him for corporate ID and remind him that he's breaking a visitor's curfew. They change their tune only slightly when he lets them know that he has 300 credits on him. And while they're shaking him down, he eventually strikes and engages in a bit of hand-to-hand combat that ends with the 2 guards pretty much laid out on the floor. While he's in the midst of threatening one of the guards, he discovers that he's accidentally killed the other. The guard left alive is frantic, and he's immediately coming up with a cover story, hoping that Cassian will spare him. And surprisingly enough, we watch Cassian Andor, the supposed hero of this show, pull out a blaster and shoot a guy who is on his knees begging for his life in the head. I was floored that Disney would show something like this, but as nuts as it sounds, I was also relieved. It showed me right off the bat that Disney is more than willing to get their hands in the mud with this show, and I think that that's something that they've majorly been missing in Star Wars media. Having killed both guards, Cassian runs off, gets in his ship, and takes off, leaving Morlana 1. On Ferrix, we're treated to a little Star Wars comedy. A droid is shuffling about, and he's accosted by 2 hounds, one of which lifts his leg and starts to pee on the little droid. The droid treats the hound to a little electric shock, which sends the beast scampering off. The droid approaches a now sleeping Cassian, who's having a dream of a childhood memory, where he and a tribe of children watch a ship get blown up and fall out of the sky. When he wakes, the droid, called B2EMO, questions Cassian on where he's been and notifies him that his friend Brasso had been by looking for him the night before. Cassian gets into a spirited conversation with the little droid as he asks him to lie for him if anybody else asks where he's been or what he's been up to. And already this conversation shows me that I like this droid way better than BB-8, and he's about as charismatic as K2SO, the droid in Rogue One. Cassian goes to meet up with with his friend Brasso, and he's got an entire cover story made up that he really needs his buddy to go along with. It's clear that Brasso is a ride or die type of guy, because he comes up with the rest of the story to fill in the gaps that Cassian left. Back on Morlana 1, the world's most uptight deputy inspector is reporting to his boss about the 2 guards found dead. All they have on the suspect so far is that he's got dark features and he's presumably from Kenari. The deputy inspector has taken this to heart, but his boss wants to hear none of it. He says, for one, the lounge the 2 guards were at was actually a brothel. They were drinking on the job and definitely not doing things by the books, so it's not worth looking into. With that, he leaves, but it's clear to us that by the look on that deputy inspector's face, he's not letting this go. Back on Ferrix, Cassian Andor meets up with a female friend of his named Bix Colleen. He tells her he's looking to sell an untraceable Imperial Star Path unit he's had saved, and clearly he's desperate for cash so that he can leave Ferrix and lay low elsewhere. Bix is initially argumentative, and the energy between the two lets us know that there might have been some history going on there. And it seems because of that history, Bix eventually agrees to help him out and lets him know that she's got a buyer that she can call. In this moment, it's revealed that Bix is currently involved with a colleague of hers at the yard she works at. And though Cassian teases her on the matter, it seems more like this is definitely going to be a relevant topic in the next couple of episodes. On Morlana, the deputy inspector has found a signal of Cassian's ship leaving hours before without having gone through a checkpoint. So he starts a search for Kenari men on Ferrix. We start to see a little more of what kind of guy Cassian Andor really is. He's approached by a couple of friends of his, Nurchi and Vetch, who he seems to owe money to. He only gets out of it with his smooth talking and basically just walking away from the guys. And so we're kind of getting treated to a little bit more of Cassian's shady, kind of sketchy side. Later on, we see Bix leaving work and followed by Tim, that coworker that she's involved with, but he loses her. She heads to some kind of communication tower, presumably to send out that message to her buyer. Meanwhile, Cassian is working on that ship we saw him arrive in, which, surprise, surprise, doesn't actually belong to him. We're given another piece of that flashback to Cassian's childhood, where the kids finally decide to go investigate the crash site, and the episode ends here. This is definitely the slowest episode of the 3, and yet it's still better than any episode of the Book of Boba Fett. Especially because this episode is just doing world building and building up this tension and intrigue to Cassian Andor's character that really leads me to believe that Disney knows what they're doing with this one. Now, on to episode 2. We open on the continuation of the flashback that ends episode 1. As Cassian and the children trudge onward through the forest towards the crash site, we get a glimpse of what looks to be an abandoned mine on this planet, with machines in disrepair left lying around. In present day, the workday is concluded with the banging of a metal anvil in the center of town. Bix returns to the yard after having sent out her message, and Tim, her colleague slash romantic partner, tries to get her to go out for the evening. She manages to dodge him, reschedules for the next night, and leaves, but when he investigates the screen that she was looking at, he finds the transmission from the Primor Authority looking for a Kenari male on Ferrix. Cassian arrives home, where Marva, the woman we presume to be a mother figure to Cassian, is solemnly waiting. B2, the droid, reads him the transmission from the Primor Authority, and he and Marva start panicking. Apparently, it's not common knowledge that Cassian was born on Kenari. He and Marva have been telling people that he was born on Fest for years. B2 tells Cassian that Bix was searching for him, and when he meets with her, he's forced to tell her the truth about what happened on Morlana with those 2 guards. She notifies him that her buyer will be there in the morning to make the deal. Cassian is super grateful, and the energy between the two is friendly. Unfortunately, this entire exchange is witnessed by Tim. Tim, imbued with boyfriendly jealousy and liquid courage, heads to what seems to be the Star Wars equivalent of a payphone and reports Cassian to the Primor Authority. They identify Cassian Andor fairly quickly, and the deputy inspector is actually encouraged to track down and make an example of Cassian Andor for having killed those 2 guards in the line of duty. Back at home, we see Cassian dig up that Star Path unit, seemingly getting it prepped to sell in the morning. The next morning, we see the buyer, played by Stellan Skarsgård, arriving on Ferrix as the day begins. Cassian fits B2 EMO with a comm device while ignoring his pleas for him to stay, and it's here that we also get a little more of that flashback sequence showing Cassian and the kids all making their way to the crash site. During the flashback, when they arrive at the crash site, they investigate the wreckage and they find various bodies strewn around. It's pretty intense for Disney and super bold of them to show a bunch of literal dead people strewn about, so kudos to them for being that brave. The presumed leader of the tribe approaches the crashed ship, and it's then that a survivor pops up behind her and shoots and kills her, causing the children to panic, start shooting blow darts at him, and killing him as well. In present day, Cassian meets with an acquaintance that can arrange for his passage off-planet. The conversation between the two men gives us a little more information as to what Kenari is. The planet was once a mining colony, and after a huge incident that caused the destruction of the mine and a ton of loss of human life, it was abandoned and basically marked as toxic. Meanwhile, the inspectors from the Primor Authority are already en route to Ferrix to find and arrest Cassian. After a brief scene of Bix's buyer on a transport to meet with Cassian, the episode ends. In my opinion, this episode really starts to pick up and is showing us way more of that dark, seedy underbelly of Star Wars we're so often teased with but never really get to see. This is the kind of energy I would have expected from a series like the Book of Boba Fett, and since they butchered that, I'm really glad we're getting that vibe here. I'm sure other viewers will complain about the slowness of this episode in episode 1. After all, there wasn't a big firefight or starships blowing up, but this is the midpoint of our premiere, and it's definitely giving us a taste of the tension this show is set to provide. With that being said, let's get into episode 3. Like episode 2, episode 3 starts with the continuation of the flashback to Cassian Andor's childhood. We get to see Cassian exploring the crash site now completely alone. Back in present day, Cassian tells his friend Brasso that if all goes well, he'll be leaving Ferrix today, and he asks him to please do him the favor and look after Marva. Meanwhile, the buyer arrives at the terminal and meets up with Bix. She tells him the Primor Authority are already looking for Cassian, but he seems hell-bent on meeting up with him anyway. We're treated to another piece of that flashback scene, which shows us a much younger Marva scavenging the same crash site and coming across a young Cassian. Back in present day, the Primor Authority is landing on Ferrix, and it's obvious the townfolk are not happy to see them. This, to me, is super important to show. Why? It's the little pieces that show us the unrest that is gradually building up to what will become the rebellion that our hero will give his life for in 5 years' time. Now, in another bit of the flashback, it's revealed that ships of the Republic are already on their way to investigate the crash site. And knowing the likelihood that Cassian will be shot by Republic officers, Marva tranquilizes the boy and takes him with her. In present day, Marva sits and watches as her home is torn apart by the officers looking for Cassian. It seems like their search is futile until they come across B2EMO. And in the worst possible timing, Cassian starts communicating with the droid at that exact moment. This allows for the Primor Authority to track the signal to his comlink to his exact location. As Bix's buyer moves to meet up with Cassian, the Primor Authority are on their way to find him. By now, the presence of the officers has the town in an uproar. They are clanging on metal objects to send a signal that everyone has to go back inside, close up shop, and hide until these guys are gone. While Cassian and the buyer haggle, Bix is warned about the Primor Authority having arrived to arrest Cassian. However, when Tim tells her not to help him, that it's not her problem, she comes to the conclusion that he's the one that ratted her friend out, and upset, she leaves to go find Cassian. Meanwhile, Cassian and the buyer discuss how he came across that Imperial Starpath unit, and in conversation, the two seem to share a mutual disgust of the Empire and their arrogance towards the people they rule over. All of this foreshadows Cassian joining the rebellion beautifully. It feels like real dialogue by real people, not forced exposition. In conversation, the buyer makes a comment and reveals that he knows Cassian's father was hanged. Naturally, Cassian freaks out and pulls a blaster on him, and the buyer also reveals that he knows exactly what happened on Morlana 1. He's not upset though, he wants Cassian to come with him somewhere. By now, the town is pretty much shut down as the officers near Cassian's location. The buyer gets a signal on a device in his pocket, and when he realizes Cassian has a comlink on it, he destroys it and tells him to never carry anything he doesn't control. While Bix is found and detained by officers looking for Cassian, the buyer uses some cleverly placed blast charges to blow up the doors to the hangar and actually takes out some of the officers with them. This leads to a firefight and a tense, hasty escape out of the hangar, and Cassian is forced to leave the Starpath unit behind. Outside, Bix is roughed up a little bit by the officers, and when Tim, her love interest, runs to defend her, he's shot and killed in the street. This is intense for Disney, but it plays out in a very raw and very real way. And it's another piece of the puzzle that will further justify the rebellion coming. After all, this blatant disregard for human life cannot and will not go unpunished. After this, we get some absolutely tantalizing tension as Cassian appears behind our favorite uptight deputy inspector, and after questioning him, he and the buyer leave him bound and gagged for his colleagues to find him. The two cleverly create a diversion. They send a speeder crashing nearby, and when the officers go to investigate it, they blow the whole thing up and escape on a speeder bike shared between the two of them. At this point, the body count on the Pre-Mor Authority officers is pretty high. As Cassian and the buyer ride the speeder bike all the way back to the ship, we see a touching flashback of Marva carrying Cassian to her own ship, and that fades away to show us present day, where she sits quietly crying for him. In scenes that show us the impact of the day's events, Bix is released from her restraints by other civilians, and she's forced to leave Tim's dead body in the street. That uptight deputy inspector is shell-shocked as he looks at the carnage of the dead officers before him. It's clear that this character is gonna continue to be a problem, but it's even clearer that he's definitely gonna be in some deep trouble after this. After all, he was told to leave this matter alone, and his stubbornness resulted in the deaths of way more of his colleagues than just the two guys that got killed in that alley, and it also resulted in unarmed civilians being shot in the street, which looks really bad for the Empire, assuming they still care about optics at this point. Cassian and the buyer finally make it back to the ship, and we cut to that flashback of Marva's own ship taking off in the past. These beautifully arranged parallels show us both past and present day Cassian Andor looking through the front glass of the ship, a golden sun glinting on his face, and his expression showing that while he's not sure what lies ahead, he's definitely ready for it. And that concludes episode 3. What a show! While I'm sure the folks who thought the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi were really good shows might be bored and will definitely disagree with me, I think that besides The Mandalorian, this is shaping up to be the best Star Wars series to date. This is a 3-episode premiere that is entertaining enough on its own. Yes, it's a slow burn, but it shows promise. And there is already such a big payoff and such amazing action in episode 3 that I can't imagine where they're gonna go from here. I can't see the rest of this show being anything but incredibly entertaining and super solid Star Wars TV moving forward. It's dramatic, it's gritty, it's serious, and it's tense in all the best ways. And it definitely shares the same grit that we all loved in Rogue One. I am so glad that this is a 12-episode series, because another 9 weeks of solid episodes like this, that is gonna be a treat. Once again, my rating of the 3-episode premiere of Andor is a solid 9 out of 10. Fans of the more serious side of Star Wars will love this, and I know I, for one, am hungry for more Andor. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on the premiere of Andor in the comments below.